Hello and welcome back to another video. As you can probably guess, this one is about the front wing and trying to bring this back to some sort of reasonable condition because there is quite a bit of rust on it. Now if you're interested in seeing how I got this off the car, you can click on the pop-up banner just up there or in the description below. Now there is a little bit of rust here and there on the panel. We've got some at the very front that's starting to bubble and flake. We've got some slight bubbling going on here and there. But the majority of the work is going to be in the wheel arch lip. Heavy rust, heavy flaking, there's some holes here and there, and it started to deform the lip as well. It's starting to go wavy, so this panel might be beyond repair, but we're going to give it a go anyway. And while on the topic of it, this is, like most of my videos, less of a how-to and more of a how I did, and the motto of the channel is fast becoming. I'm not an expert, but I'll have a damn good go at it. Now there's not much to take off the panel, but I think I am going to remove this light, this indicator light, and then give the panel a really good clean, and then we'll start taking it back to bare metal and we'll see what we end up with. Alright, so I'm just going to be using a general purpose degreaser to clean this up. Alright then, so there are a few other bits I've noticed that need some attention now that the panel is a little bit clean. There's a couple of stone chips here and there that'll only ever get worse, so I need to sort them out. And there is some bubbling in the lacquer around the indicator light, so I'm going to take that out next. Right, so I think what I'm going to use to take back the paint is one of these poly paint remover wheels. In fact, it's the same wheel I used on the subframe to take all the paint off and rust off of there. The one thing I did like about these is it does leave the metal underneath relatively unharmed, so I am going to go at this with one of these. This is a used disc, so it should be even less aggressive, so we'll see how we get on. So for the inside of the lip, I was finding it a little bit difficult to get in with the angle grinder, so I'm using this this thin file thing instead. Right, I think that's pretty much all the rust I can get off with the machines at least. So I'm now going to give the panel a really good clean so I can see if there's any bits that I've missed. And then I'm going to go around and treat the bare metal with a rust converter, as there are some bits that are really difficult to get into. So the rust converter I'm using is by Hammerite. Right, so I've left the panel overnight because the rust converter takes a few hours to do its thing, so leaving it overnight is going to give it a really good chance of doing just that. Now there are holes throughout the lip, and there are also divots where the rust has eaten into the metal as well, so it is going to take a little bit of filler, which is the next step. But before I do that, I'm going to give it one last clean with some white spirit. Right, so the panel is nice and clean. So for the body filler, I'm going to be using this Isopon P38. It's a multi-purpose body filler. According to this, it's easy to sand and to smooth, and there's 3 instructions on the side. The first one being sand and clean the area, so we've done that. And then apply the filler and allow it to dry for 20 minutes. So that's next. Right, so in the box we have a spatula card thing, a spreader, some instructions, hardener, and then the filler itself. I need a flathead screwdriver to get that off. Okay. So as you've probably heard before, it's looking for a golf ball size bit of filler to a pea size bit of hardener, and it needs to be really thoroughly mixed so it's one uniform colour. Now I don't play golf, but I imagine that's a golf ball size. And that looks like a pea. So as to not introduce air bubbles into this, I'm just going to fold this over itself many times. Right, so I'm not seeing any more of the hardener, the pink hardener on its own, so I'm guessing that's good enough. Now once this is mixed, you've got about 4 minutes of working time, so you do have to get a wriggle on. So I'm just going to press this into these holes and just work my way around. Right, so it's been a good half an hour and the hardener has gone off. If you press your nail into it, if it leaves a mark, it's probably not hard enough. So I'm now going to sand this back with some 80 grit sandpaper first, see what we're left with. Right, so I've now got it to a stage where I can't feel the difference between the metal and the filler. It's really smooth. So now I'm going to move on to 180 grit sandpaper and do the same thing again. Right, so now I need to give the panel a really good clean. I'll start with a microfiber towel cloth, and then I'll probably finish it with some white spirit. Alright, so the panel is now clean. Now I'm quite pleased with how the filler went on. That's come out really well. It's quite easy to sand actually. Now I do know that I've got a bit of a problem to tackle, because between the original paintwork and the bare metal there is this lip that goes all the way around. Now with this one, I'm kind of doing these both at the same time, but with this one I just applied primer all the way around, a couple of coats of primer, and then I tried to feather that edge by wet sanding. That didn't really work because it was really, you could see a really obvious line all the way around, and you could almost see the transition between the different layers. So what I did in the end is I sanded it all back again, and I used this standard woodworking orbital sander. Now I know I might get some abuse in the comments, but you work with what you've got. So 120 grit sandpaper, I went around that edge to feather it some more, and then I went over it again with a couple of coats of primer, and it's much better. I can't hardly see where the line is. I certainly can't feel it. So after a wet sand, I think that's going to turn out much better. I was planning on just priming the bits of metal sanded back, but I ended up just really going over the panel because there's quite a few spots all over the place. So I'm going to feather the edge on this panel next, but before I do that, I need to take off this badge. So I'm going to give it a quick soak in something anyway, like white spirit. I'm using WD-40. Let's try and get into the back of the adhesive. And then I'm going to use some dental floss to try and work my way around the back. This is really trying my patience now, screw it. Yeah, so just after that quick pass, I can't feel that transition at all, so I'm convinced. So I've pretty much gone around the whole panel. I can't feel any transition between the metal and the old paint. I'm not going to really know if it's a problem until I get some primer on here, and then it'll show up, by which time it's too late. So to be sure, I'm going to go around with some wet and dry 400 grit, just try and take out anything that might be a problem, like some of the finer scratches that I've just put in with a 120 grit. Right, I'm going to sit and let that dry because it's a nice sunny day for once, and then I'll come back and put some primer on it. Okay, right, so this panel is now clean, so I've cleaned it with some white spirit, and I'm going to put a very light coat on first of this etch primer. That should help bite into whatever it is it's going to land on, and it's also a good idea to wear a respirator, even though we're outside. It's a good idea to put a respirator on when doing any kind of spraying. Right, so I'm going to let that dry for 15 minutes, and I'll come back and do a second coat. Right, I'm going to try and put on one last coat of primer. Now, I'm almost out of this, so it might not make it. In between coats, I am also using this tack cloth, which is going to pick up any loose debris that might have settled in between drying times. Right, so I'm going to leave that to dry a good 15-20 minutes, and then I'll come back and do a wet sand. Now you may have noticed that I've gone, I've not masked anywhere off to apply the primer, and that's just because I've got bits sanded here and there. It would just look silly, so I've just gone at it as is. Also, when I did the other panel, I had it lying horizontally flat down, and what I noticed is that, and this might seem obvious to anybody that does this sort of thing more regularly, is that when I was spraying it this way, the can was spitting a lot because it's obviously drawing air rather than paint through. So I've just angled it down so I can not have it spit everywhere. Right, so while the paint is drying on the wing, I think I'm going to tackle getting off this wing bracket. It's really nasty, horrible and crusty. Now there's only one nut that seems to be holding it on, but it is rusty, so it needs replacing anyway, so we'll see how this comes off. I'm going to spray a little bit of WD-40 on here. Try and help it along.
that actually came off better than I thought. Yay. Right, now that this panel is dry, I'm going to give it a light sand with 800 grit wet and dry paper. I've been soaking this wet and dry for a little while now, so that's thoroughly saturated. I'm being careful not to apply too much pressure. I don't want to burn through the primer that I've just put on. Okay, so I'm going to dry this off and I'll come back with some white spirit to give it a really good clean. Then I'll let it dry out again, and then I'll start with the base coat. Right, so this is now dry. I'm going to go over it once more with the tack cloth, just to make sure there's nothing weird going on. And the paint I'm going to be using is a spray can I got off eBay, because the car is Starlight Silver, which is quite difficult to get hold of, really. I tried Rimmer Brothers and they're out of it. In fact, I think they've stopped selling it. So this is from Promatic, never heard of them, and Starlight Silver, colour code MBB, make Rover. So this has been sat in the sun for a little while, so it's not warm, but it's not cold. Giving it a thorough shake. I'm going to go over it. I am going to go over the whole panel. And then 3 coats, 15 minutes in between. We'll see what it looks like at the end. Nothing fancy for these brackets. On the bench grinder wire wheel, got as much rust off as possible. Went over it with some rust converter and then some matte black paint. I also went through the thread with a tap just to clean it up a bit. So you may notice this looks a bit gnarly, and I went over it with the rust converter, so obviously it's changed the colour of any kind of rust that was on there. Not going to see this, but at least it'll protect it. Right, so I'm coming in with the clear coat, the lacquer. I'm going to do 3 coats, really light. I don't want to get any runs in this. Right, so 3rd and final coat. Right, I'm going to call time on the wing repair. The left hand side is already on, the right hand side is here. There's a little bit to talk about. It didn't go as well as I'd hoped, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to get the front wing on, the wheel arch liner in, the front bumper on, and then we'll have a bit of a chat. Now all of that putting on is just the reversal of taking it off, which I've covered in previous videos, which you can check in the description below. I'll include links. Now the only difference is when I took this wing off, I had the car jacked up with the wheel off, and it was a bit easier, but is unnecessary once you know where the bolts go. So you can put a wing on and take it off with it on the ground, which is great. Bollocks. Right, well, I was just about to turn around and go, well, that's another job well done, and talk about all the bits and bobs, but the bonnet won't shut. And I think what it is, it's a year's worth of being open, not all the way down, and a little bit of a piece of metal there that's supposed to spring back when it goes all the way down and then latch onto it. I think it's seized, so I'm going to keep spraying it with plus gas and hopefully I'll just work its way free. Arrgh! Right, let's have a chat about the wings, and we'll start with the one I tackled first, the right hand side. Right, let's talk about paint first. So the paint I got off eBay, claimed to be Starlight Silver. It went on okay. The fan on the cans wasn't amazing. The Autotech ones I've used in the past was much better, but it was okay. Bearing in mind I'm outside and it's windy and all the rest of it, it went on okay. And for what I still need to wash the car and get a better, I'll run a sponge over it in a minute to get a better idea, but from what I can tell at this stage, the colour matches close enough to the rest of the car that I'm relatively happy with it, so I'm pleased there. Now the lacquer I haven't machine polished. I have ran a microfiber cloth over it with some light polish. It does need a good machine polish, as does the rest of the car, but as far as the paint's concerned, I'm quite happy. Now the areas of rust I sanded back, so I didn't sand back the entire panel, I just sanded back the areas of rust, and what I should have done is filler them properly, which I didn't do. I tried to rely on the primer, which was stupid. So depending on where you're standing, so from your point of view it looks kind of okay, but from other angles you can see where the repairs have been made. So it's all right. Now on the other side, I did something slightly different. So because I did the other panel first, I could see the outline of where I'd made the repairs. So with this panel, I ground it all back, sanded it all back to bare metal, the whole panel. I retreated the areas that were pitted due to the rust, sanded them back, and then went over the whole thing with paint. Now, I'm much more pleased with the consistency of this panel. It's really flat, really smooth. Great. I wish that had happened on the other side. But I ran out of paint. As you can probably tell, it has a bit of a dappled, speckled grey kind of feel to it. So I ran out of paint like an idiot. It takes one full can to do 3 decent coats, and I started this panel with about 2/3 of a can, so that's on me. But I don't know, let me know in the comments what you would do. Would you have another go at both these panels? Would you just leave it there, wait for a good deal to come up onto already painted panels second hand? I am quite keen to get on with starting this, getting it MOT'd and getting it on the road for some sort of a summer, so I'm kind of leaning towards just leaving it there for now, and I'll come back and revisit it because there's lots more rust work to do on the car yet. So right, well, that's my least favourite job ever, and this car just seems to be one of those that when you solve a problem it gives you another one for free. But in the next video it's all about starting the thing, finally. Now there is some bits and bobs to do in the next video before I do that, like put the battery in, put oil in it, change the oil filter, or the other way around, air filter, some water in it, not coolant, just in case there's any leaks. The ignition coil bits, some pipe work on the coolant. I need to drain the fuel out, put some new fuel in. So there's a few bits. In between that, I need to take down this carport as well, because I'm looking to move house in the next week or two, and that's going to leave this exposed. And the soft top on the back, the weather strip's knackered. So I need to put a new one on there, which I got from Screwfix for £5. I'll also be doing a giveaway in the next video as well, as it's been a while. So thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already considered it, please do consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.